Assalamu alaikum students. Today we're gonna start endocrinology. This first lecture is just an introduction to endocrinology, and then we'll be studying about various hormones and their biochemical aspects in various lectures. So endocrinology, what is endocrinology? It is the understanding of hormone secretion, how they are secreted, how they act on the receptors, how there's a feedback control, how they are regulated, how they are measured. And once when these disorders of endocrine system are diagnosed, then there is effective treatment for them. Okay. Now, the term endocrine was coined by Starling. Hormones are secreted internally and externally. Internally, when they are secreted, they are known as endocrine hormones, and when they are secreted into a lumen, that is the exocrine function of these hormones. So the term hormone is actually a Greek phrase which means to set in motion, which describes the dynamic actions of the hormones as they elicit the cellular responses and regulate the physiological biochemical processes through this feedback mechanisms. So hormones are chemical messengers that are directly secreted into the blood or extracellular fluid, which bind to specific receptors on the target cells. So the endocrine organs contain all of these: hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, adrenal glands, pancreatic islet cells, gonads, the gastrointestinal tract. Others are kidney, which gives you erythropoietin, renin; heart, which gives you ANP; lungs, which give you ACE; GIT. There are many GIT hormones. Then placenta. Many hormones are during pregnancy. So these are the overall glands that give you different hormones. The endocrine action of the hormone means that the hormone is distributed in the blood and binds to distant target cells. It is secreted somewhere and it goes to a distant target cell and acts over there. Paracrine action of the hormone means it acts locally by diffusing from its source to target cells in the neighborhood. So it is secreted, it diffuses to a nearby locality, and there it acts on the target cells. Autocrine action. Autocrine action means the hormone acts on the same cell which produced it. Okay. So here they have given you the diagram. Okay. Autocrine means this is first we'll talk about endocrine. The hormone is secreted, it goes to a different area and acts over there. Paracrine, local area and acts over there. Autocrine, it is secreted by the same cell and it acts on the same cell. All right. Then there are different types of classifications of hormones according to different actions. Okay. So first of all, the classification is according to the chemical nature, according to origin, according to the nature of actions, according to mechanism of actions. So according to chemical nature, there could be steroid hormone, amino acid derivatives, the peptide hormones, protein hormones, glycoprotein hormones, the lipid or eicosanoids hormones. So the steroid hormones are testosterone, estrogen and progesterone. Amine hormones may be T3, T4, epinephrine, norepinephrine, etc. Peptide hormones are oxytocin, vasopressin, as you will study further. Protein hormones are insulin and glucagon. These are the ones sometimes in the pro form. Glycoprotein hormones, LH, FSH, and eicosanoid hormones, the prostaglandins. This classification is according to the chemical nature. On the basis of origin, so reproductive hormones, they are derived from 4 major organs. Then there are hypothalamus secreting hormones, which are secreted by hypothalamus. Then there are anterior and posterior lobe of pituitary gland, which secretes hormones. Then there are gonads like testis and ovary, they secrete hormone. Then placenta and uterus. So this classification on the basis of origin. Then according to the nature of action, that means that some hormones are known as general hormones, some are specific hormones, some are local hormones. General hormones means that they act on nearly all the body tissues, like thyroid hormone, like insulin, like growth hormone. So they are known as general hormones. Specific hormones, these affect functions of specific organs like FSH and androgens. Local hormones are the ones that act locally or to their site of production, like prostaglandins, acetylcholine, histamine. They all act at the site of their production. Then mechanism of action. The first step of hormones action is to bind to a specific receptor at the target cell where it has to work. Okay. Now some receptors are located on the cell membrane, while some are located in the cytoplasm and nucleus. Now these receptors, their cells are protein in nature, and there are about 2,000 to 100,000 receptors are present in each cell. Okay, so receptors are located on specific in or on target cells. So the action is accordingly. For example, see, this is the G protein coupled receptor. You've already studied this, that this G protein is a 7 transmembrane protein, and it has this outer unit and an inner unit. Okay, this outer unit acts as a receptor for the hormone, and the inner unit has this alpha, beta and gamma complex. Now this alpha contains GDP which is attached to it. Okay, now when a hormone comes here and gets attached, this gives a change. There is a change in this 7 transmembrane protein, and this alpha gets detached from the beta and gamma, and GDP is replaced by GTP. Now this alpha goes to the adenylate cyclase enzyme which is present in this membrane and gets attached to it. Once this gets attached to it, it activates this adenylate cyclase enzyme, and thus when this is activated, the cyclic AMP is produced. Okay, AMP is converted into cyclic AMP, and cyclic AMP is the secondary messengers. This secondary messenger system goes and activates the kinase system, and that kinase system is actually the system that is going to activate the enzymes and get a biochemical response. So some of the enzymes use these G protein coupled receptor mechanism. Then there are some enzymes that are going to use the PIP2 mechanism. Okay, here also what happens is you have this whole thing, this G protein hormone binds to a receptor. There is this alpha beta gamma complex. Alpha subunit is gonna get detached, and alpha subunit is gonna go and get attached to the enzyme phospholipase C. Okay, now this phospholipase C is gonna, when it is activated, it cleaves the phosphatidyl inositol 4,5 bisphosphate, that is the PIP2, okay, which is present in the membrane. The PIP2 is cleaved to DAG, that is IP2 and IP3 and DAG, diacylglycerol and IP3. Okay, this DAG goes to the protein kinase system and directly activates it. IP3 goes to the calcium channel, sarcoplasmic reticulum. It activates the calcium channels to open. The calcium comes outside. It activates the protein kinase C system. There are phosphorylated proteins and the intercellular effects that are to be produced. So this is the DAG and the or the calcium mechanism, or the PIP, you can say PIP2 mechanism, which is used by some of the hormones. Then there are some hormones like steroid hormones that use this mechanism where this hormone diffuses into the cell and goes into the nucleus and binds to the DNA, to the hormone response element N, activates the DNA for transcription. There is transcription occurring, messenger RNA is made, and then there is translation occurring, proteins are made, and these proteins, after the activity, they are the ones that are responsible for the cellular activities that are gonna take place. So your steroid hormone uses this mechanism of action where they go and get attached to the nuclear DNA receptor, and then there is transcription and translation, and how this transcription translation gives you new proteins and how the molecular responses are taking place. So according to the mechanism of action, you have this these systems. One more, that is the kinase system, okay, tyrosine kinase system. This is a system which insulin uses, okay. This insulin receptor has two units, okay, alpha units, which is outside this cell membrane, and beta unit, which is a part of this membrane, okay. This beta unit has this tyrosine kinase activity. So when insulin comes and binds to the insulin receptor, this tyrosine kinase system gets activated. There is phosphorylation of enzymes and substrate, and further there are different responses, growth and gene expression, and there are different responses which we will discuss in detail when we will study insulin. So this is the tyrosine kinase system which insulin uses for as a mechanism of action. So these are the four mechanism of actions of hormones, how they come and work. Then the important thing is properties of hormones. There are different properties of hormones which we should know while we will study further, so that we know what we're talking about, okay. So the first property is receptor of hormones. So specific hormones act on tissues via receptors, okay. For example, uterus has estrogen receptors, then intestinal cells have vitamin D receptors. So the hormone goes and acts on its target tissues. The second property is half-life. So what is a half-life? A hormone's half-life is the time required for half the concentration of the hormone to be degraded. So for example, T3 has a half-life of 1 day and T4 has a half-life of 7 days. That means the hormones that have shorter half-lives need to be sent in the blood circulation more oftenly as compared to the ones who have a longer half-life. Then the third property is onset of action. So every hormone, most of the hormones will have immediate and delayed effects. That means ACTH, when produced, its immediate effect will be release of cortisol from adrenal cortex. But its delayed effect is hypertrophy and hyperplasia of the adrenal cortex. So this is the third property. Fourth property is type of actions. So this I already talked about. There is generalized action, there is specific action. Some enzymes, they have effects on all the tissues like growth hormone, thyroid hormone, insulin. So they are known as generalized hormone. Then there is specific hormones. Oxytocin has effects on myoepithelial cells of lactating breast. So they are going to act on the myoepithelial cells of lactating breast, not on all tissues. So they are specific hormones. Then storage. So some of them can be stored and released on stimulus. Some can be stored in a much larger quantity like thyroid than some which are stored in very less amount and given out whenever needed. Release of hormones. So the release of hormones is can occur in these different forms. converting insoluble to soluble, and then releasing, example, thyroglobulin to T3 and T4 by the action exocytosis. Insulin, glucagon, growth hormone, they use this exocytosis as the release, and some use passive diffusion, like steroid hormones. They use passive diffusion for the release. Regulation of hormones, so they can be regulated by different mechanisms, like negative feedback. That means that with the hormone is released, and when it is enough for the body, it itself gives a feedback that I'm there and you don't need to give me more in the blood. So that is like self inhibition. Okay, then there is concentration of ion. It also depends on the concentration of ions. The regulation, it depends on the positive feedback, the impulses that you need for the stimulus that is needed for this regulation. Then there's nerve impulses, then stimulation of sympathetic nervous system, like the adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. These are the ones that are used. These are the mechanisms that are used for the regulation of hormones. So then there is rhythms. Okay, so this is also how the regulation of hormone takes place by rhythms: ultradian, circadian, and infradian. That means that some hormones are produced within minutes and hours. So they are produced for minutes and hours. Circadian means 24-hour or diurnal variation or diurnal rhythm. That means these are produced in 24-hour rhythm. Then there's infradian, which is, these are some thyroid hormones that are released for years. Okay, so their rhythm is for years. So as like infrared rays, the name comes from infradian. Okay, ultradian is like short. Okay, so few minutes to hours. Prepro hormones, pro hormones, some hormones are released as prepro peptides. They need to be cleaved to activated hormones like prepro insulin, then proinsulin, like proglucagon. These are the examples. The measurements of hormones, there are some measurement assays that are used, like ELISA technique, like you can check your T3, T4 levels by serum blood. So these are the different techniques that are used for the measurement of hormones. Production of abnormal hormones, that means that abnormal insulin production that doesn't bind to insulin receptors. This is an abnormal hormone. And then incompletely processed peptides that are given in the circulation. Then immunoglobulins that act on hormone receptors. They are not supposed to go and get attached to the hormone receptors, but they do. Okay, so this is the abnormal production of hormones. Ectopic production of hormones. Ectopic means that means like ectopic pregnancy, not in the uterus, somewhere else. So ADH is produced by carcinoma of bronchus. You don't need I'm like ADH, the primary site of production is not carcinoma of bronchus, but this is an ectopic production of hormone by the carcinoma of bronchus. Beta HCG by testicular tumor. So these are some examples of ectopic production of hormones. Then 12 properties: hormone resistance that occurs due to defects in receptors, antibodies to hormones, antibodies to receptors, absence of the target tissue receptors. The 13th property is permissive action of hormones. So a hormone is said to have permissive effect on the action of a second hormone when it enhances the responsiveness of a target organ to the second hormone, or when it increases the activity of the second hormone. Like estrogen, expression of progesterone receptors on uterus, progesterone effect on the uterus. Okay, then one example is parathyroid hormone cannot work without vitamin D. Vitamin D enhances the parathyroid hormone work on removing the calcium from bones, or action of calcium on bones. The glucocorticoid effects of catecholamines on cardiovascular system. Then thyroid hormones effects of catecholamines on cardiovascular system. So these are some hormones. They have this permissive effect. They enhance each other's effect. So what are the functions? Maintenance of growth and development, maintenance of internal environment, regulation of energy balance and metabolism, reproduction and species propagation. So these are some functions of the hormones. And here our lecture ends on the introduction of hormones. We'll be starting the hypothalamic and pituitary hormones in the next lecture, inshallah. And hopefully you understood. And thank you very much.